Today we're installing a new skid plate on the TJ. This one's going to protect the transmission as well as the oil pan. Let's get into it. So this is the skid plate I went with. It is by Undercover Fab Works. So we get the skid plate. We have got two braces that bolt to the front. You've got two brackets that bolt onto the motor mounts on each side. And then here on the back, we're gonna have to drill some new holes in our existing transfer case skid plate. Now it does come bare metal, so we are gonna go through and clean this thing up and get it painted before we put it on. We also get all the hardware that is needed. So this is a 2004 Rubicon. From factory, there is a skid plate that covers the automatic transmission pan. Bolts on here and runs across. The problem is when you lift these Jeeps, then the drive shaft actually comes down and hits on that skid plate. So we can't use the factory skid plate. That's why we've went with the Undercover Fab skid plate. This is what the factory one looks like. Like I said, you've got a bolt on either side, hangs down, and then the back bolts into the factory transfer case skid. I've got all the parts laid out. I've wiped them all down with brake clean to get any oil or residue off of them before I paint them. The skid plate itself had a pretty good gash up front, had some slag on it, some sharp edges on the front there. I took my grinder to it, just smoothed a few of those areas out. I know it's kind of a waste of time because it's a skid plate. It's going to get scratched up and dinged up, but I want to kind of start with it as smooth as I can, as clean as I can when I paint it. That way it's going to hold up as well as possible. Plus, when I need to touch it up when it does get scratched up, it'll just make that a little bit easier. What I'm using is a Rust-Oleum clean metal primer and then just a semi-gloss black on all of this stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and get it painted. So now we are right here at the motor mount. There are these two holes, one on the passenger side, one on the driver's side. That is where our bracket is going to hang from. So your tab goes forward, and then we're going to drop our bolts down through this motor mount. So we did a flat washer, a lock washer, and then the nut. These are nylon locking nuts. Now we need to tighten it down to 33 foot-pounds with a 9/16 socket. We have got the passenger side on. I'm going to come over here and do the exact same thing on the driver's side. One thing to take note of, on the driver's side, that round tab is on the back, where if we look over here on the passenger side, it is on the front. Just keep that in mind. Now we've got these two struts. The longer of the two goes on the driver's side. Now, this bracket hangs down just like this. We've got a hole here, we've got a hole there. And I'm gonna leave that loose for now. Then we've got the longer one, put on the same way on the driver's side. This is the hard part. We're gonna have to get this positioned up under the Jeep, get my front two bolts in, and then I'm gonna have to drill some holes in my existing skid plate. So how I'm gonna try this, so I'm gonna get this thing positioned up on my jack, see if I can get it pushed up in place, kind of hold it, because I'm doing this by myself. I would really recommend you have somebody help you with this part of it. So I pulled this bracket back off, still got that one on. Got my jack holding up the skid plate. I'm running into some fitment issues, so I started looking at the instructions. So if we look right here at step 2, it says the bolts should be installed from the top side so that they hang in place. That's what we've done. Then if I go to their website and we zoom in here, you can see right there that they've got the bolts going in from the bottom. Because what I'm running into is this bracket is hitting the nut. So if I put that in the other direction, it looks like that would clear that. So we're gonna give that a shot. So after a bunch of trial and error, I think I've got it figured out. So the instructions are not correct, at least for my Jeep. So I had to turn those bolts around, put them up through the top and put the nut on the back side, which that was a little bit of a trick. This side, I just left the nut on the bottom because it doesn't seem to be an issue. Another thing I had to change from the instructions is this bar actually is supposed to go on the back side of that bracket. It put it at a weird angle, so I had to move it around to the front side of it, which this one on this side is on the back side. So they're different from side to side, but that's what I had to do to get this all lined up. Another thing I had to do different from the instructions is it shows the bolt going in this way and the nut going on the back. Well, if we come look right here, it hits the exhaust if you do it that way. So I actually ran the bolt this way, my nut on the outside. Then I had to look up through the hole, line up that drain plug. But another thing that you have to pay attention to is the transmission clearance. So this is an automatic transmission. So if we look where that lip comes up, you've got to make sure you've got it centered, because it just barely fits on either side of the transmission pan. So make sure you've got it centered there. Yet another thing I ran into is you're supposed to drill 4 holes and have 4 bolts that hold this thing on. Well, if we look, I'm only going to be able to do 2 bolts because the skid plate is not long enough to actually come all the way back and allow 4 holes to be drilled. Now I thought maybe I could just, get the whole thing pushed back enough to get 4 bolts here. But the problem being is we hit the exhaust before we get back far enough. So since we have to be pushed forward a little bit, now our exhaust is hitting right here. There's supposed to be a cutout for it, so I'm gonna have to take this thing back down and grind this down a little bit to make room for this exhaust. And this is a factory exhaust, so not sure why we're having so many fitment issues. But since these are all still loose, I've got it centered where I want it. I've got it pushed enough forward that we're not hitting the exhaust on the front. I've got my drain plug lined up. I have got, once again, the oil pan where I want it, where it's fitting down in between the skid plate on both sides. So I need to go ahead and drill these 2 holes just so I know this is exactly where I want it. Then I'm going to take the thing back down and do my grinding on my exhaust over here. So I've got my holes drilled, taking the thing back off. Now we're going to go grind down so we can get clearance right here on our exhaust. So here's the clearance that's already there. Kind of marked it. I'm going to need to take a little bit more off back along this area, clear that exhaust. So I got this clearanced out. I'm not quite sure if I went far enough yet, but what I've done is put my bolts in back here. I'm going to go ahead and start to snug up all my bolts holding this on and see how the thing shifts, see if we need to do a little more grinding on this. And once I get it fit how I wanted, I need to bring it back down and hit that spot with a coat of paint so we don't get any rust. As I started tightening my bolts down, I'm hitting on that exhaust again, so I need to take it back down and do a little more grinding. I'm gonna use my marker here to just kind of mark where I need some more off. Okay, we've come back, tightened all our bolts. So we're tight there and here on both sides. We clearanced our pan out more here, went ahead and painted it, and we are clearing that exhaust. Just barely, but we are clearing it. Got our holes drilled back here. Now we're gonna go ahead and tighten these down. Now these are not nylon nuts, so I'm gonna go ahead and put just a dab of blue Loctite on these to make sure they don't come out. So overall, the quality of the skid plate itself is pretty good. The welds are good. It's nice thick steel. I think it's definitely going to do the job. As far as fitment and instructions, they're not great. So just be prepared to make some modifications. As you can see, I had to actually grind down on that thing. I had to change the way the bolts are supposed to go in. I had to reposition the brackets. I had to do quite a bit to make this thing fit. But once again, that's kind of what you get sometimes with aftermarket parts. So if you guys found this video helpful, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel to help out a bunch. And I'll see you guys next time.